I think to many people the words budget and Japan seem to be something of a contradiction. There's this assumption that the cost of visiting Japan for a 2-week holiday would be enough to bankrupt a dictator, but it doesn't have to.
In the last few years, Japan has experienced a boom in tourism, from 8 million overseas tourists in 2007 to 24 million last year. And with it, it's led to a whole new wave of hostels and hotels, rail passes, buses and low-cost domestic airlines that have made it cheaper to experience and travel the country than ever before. In fact, this year in the UK, Tokyo was ranked as the cheapest long-haul destination, thanks to a fall in the value of the yen.
In this video, we'll be looking at ways that you can save money on transportation, accommodation and dining out, and giving you a general idea of how much you could be spending on any given day. The boom in tourism has seen an explosion of new hostels and hotels opening across Japan, especially in Tokyo. But whether you're staying at a hotel, motel or holiday inn, the cheapest place to stay in Tokyo is the area of Asakusa and Ueno, where the majority of the hostels are. So the absolute cheapest option, accommodation-wise, is staying in a hostel in a dormitory where you can find a bed for as little sometimes as 2,000 yen. If I'm travelling in a group, that's usually the option we go for. The second best option is staying in a capsule hotel, which is a bit more expensive, between 3,000 to 5,000 yen per night. If I had to choose between a hostel and a capsule hotel, I would usually go for a capsule hotel just because the beds are bigger, there's some degree of privacy with the shutter, and you get your own TV. What more could you want? After capsule hotels, the next cheapest option is to stay at a business hotel where you can find a single room for about 5,000 yen per night if you're lucky, but typically between 5,000 to 7,000 yen. I could recommend some budget hotel chains like Toyoku Inn or APA Hotels, but actually I found over the last year the best way is to just go online and compare prices for about half an hour. The three best websites are probably booking.com, japanican.com and Rakuten Travel, and Hostel World if you're booking a hostel. You can find bargains on Airbnb as well, especially if you're travelling in a group of like 3 or 4 people. But if you're travelling solo, I tend to find Airbnb works out to be more expensive, and I use it more for the experience of staying somewhere interesting rather than to travel on a budget. Finally, the wildcard option is to stay in a love hotel where you can find a room for about 8,000 yen per night on average. Although with a love hotel, you're paying for the room rather than the people in it. So if you're going with 2 people, then it still works out cheaper than a standard hotel room. And it's typically a lot bigger than a standard hotel room, with things like cages, teddy bear caves and jacuzzis at your disposal. Try and book all of your accommodation at least 3 months in advance to save quite a bit of money. And also for hostels, it's kind of essential given that they are still a bit of a rarity. So try and book them all 3 months in advance to not only get a room, but to get one cheap as well. And the last option, and one that I use a heck of a lot, are overnight buses, which leads us on to transportation. Japan's transportation infrastructure is legendary. Riding on trains is an effortless joy. They're never late, they're always clean, and passengers aren't shouting down the phone about how drunk they were last weekend with their friends Barry and Deborah. But it is a little bit pricey, especially the bullet trains. And the first conundrum most foreign travellers have when coming here is whether or not to get the Japan Rail Pass, where for about 46,000 yen, you can travel the country freely for 2 weeks on Shinkansen and local trains and save quite a bit of money and have peace of mind along the way. To give you an idea of how much you could save, if you came to Japan for a 2-week trip, visiting Tokyo, Kyoto and Hiroshima, the cost of catching bullet trains on a round trip would be around 43,000 yen. If you take into consideration other costs, such as subway trains and buses, that'd likely add up to another 10,000 yen. At the minimum, you're saving about 6,000 yen, but probably more. And more importantly, it'll save you the time and stress of standing around at ticket machines every day for 2 weeks, buying train tickets and bus tickets. And that alone is a good enough reason to consider it. However, there is an even cheaper way of travelling the country. Some friends recently visited and we travelled the same route from Tokyo to Kyoto and Hiroshima. Instead of using 3 bullet trains on the round trip, we used 2 night buses and a domestic flight from Hiroshima back to Tokyo. On top of that, we probably spent another 10,000 yen travelling around the cities on the subway trains. That gave us a total of 34,000 yen, which is quite a bit cheaper than getting the Japan Rail Pass. If you're travelling Japan on a budget, let night buses be your secret weapon, because as well as being half the price of a bullet train, if you travel through the night, you're also saving on accommodation as well. For example, we travelled on the night bus for 2 nights and thus saved 2 nights of accommodation, which would have been around another 8,000 yen. That said, if you are travelling by night bus, there are a few additional costs. For example, you'll need to spend at least another 600 yen on a bottle of wine to make sure you're fully knocked out for the duration of the trip. I'd say 50% of the time I'm able to sleep on the night bus, and the other 50% of the time I arrive at my destination a broken man, cursing the day that buses were ever invented. The 2 best websites for booking are Willer Express and japantravelbus.com, which are both in English and are nice and easy to use. In recent years though, Japan's also seen a steady stream of low-cost airline carriers popping up. For example, to fly from Sendai to Osaka costs as little as 5,000 yen with Peach Airlines, far cheaper than by train and even by bus. And if you still want to know if the Japan Rail Pass is worth it or not, you can use the Japan Rail Pass calculator on the Japan Guide's website, where you can input the length of time you're staying and your itinerary to get a rough idea of whether or not it's worth it. And if you want to save even more money, there's an even cheaper way than by travelling by bus. You can travel by skateboard. No, seriously, I'm not even trolling you. I know a guy who travelled all the way from Sapporo to Hiroshima on a skateboard. It took him 33 days and he saved at least 5,000 yen, which is the cost of travelling by plane. The only question that remains is, how budget are you willing to go? Yeah, I would have just flown it.